That's okay. Some buyers, particularly, I've seen this in Pakistan, Bangladesh, I'm not sure about India, where they have contracts for LNG and the suppliers have figured out, I can pay the penalty for violating the contract because it does have a clause. If I don't deliver it, I pay. I can pay the penalty. I can then sell that gas instead of at the contract price. I can sell at the spot market price and still make tens of millions of dollars on that cargo, even after I pay you the penalty. So you've had some suppliers say, sorry, I'm going to go sell this somewhere else. Here's the little penalty check we negotiated in the contract years ago. Have a nice day.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Got it over here.
Okay, now we can go to the next one.
Okay.
A lot of this obviously revolves around Russia. And like I said, China, India, Turkey, they're taking advantage of it. They're buying Russian crude at a discount. A month ago, average discount was about $22 to the global benchmark Brent. There's a point this summer, they were getting oil crude out of Russia at a $40 discount. Now, we can talk about Putin and the war and the immorality of it, but some of these other countries, kind of immorality, be damned. I can't afford 120, but if I'll take it for 80, it's self-preservation for their economy and the politics of whoever's in charge. China's importing record coal and LNG from Russia, so they're the new best friend. It serves both their interests, right? China didn't get to be China by paying Nordstrom prices for anything. They look for the Walmart price. Right now, Russia's selling energy at a Walmart price. China's okay with it. They're buying a lot of it, so it's redirecting flows. Again, Russia's producing a lot more than people thought they would. It's just going to different customers. So oil and gas that would have gone there is now going somewhere else. Russia just hasn't that much in sales volume. Now, it'll be interesting to watch. Starting, I think, December 5th, Europe plans to ban the imports of Russian crude by by putting a price cap and then enforcing it with insurance. So if the scheme or the plan would be to get insurance, if you're the tanker owner, the buyer, you have to certify you're not paying above the cap. You want to pay more, that's fine. No one will give you insurance. Well, you're not going to start moving that stuff around while on insurance. So they're hoping, and much of the insurance is underwritten by European companies. So they're hoping by using insurance or lack thereof as the enforcement tool, they can enforce the cap. There is division in Europe. First of all, is Russia going to go along with this? What kind of compliance are they going to have by buyers? Is this really going to work? And where do you set the cap? Is it a hardwired cap? Is it $60 a barrel? Is it tied to a floating average? How often do you adjust it? This one is not settled yet, and I'm not sure how well this is going to work. Because you're telling me you can't buy the oil you need if you pay $1 over the cap, but I got no other options for you. It's not like, well, if you follow this, I'll make sure you're covered. And they're talking about that, how they can move oil around so everyone's taken care of this winter. On the next slide, but you still got other supply problems. So what OPEC Plus made shockwaves to the world, right? We're going to cut production 2 million barrels a day because we think the market's getting oversupplied. And look at that and thought, well, you haven't met your production targets all year. As recently as, I don't know, August, you were short 3.6 million barrels a day. So is this really a cut, or is this just politics and for appearance? And interestingly, when OPEC first announced that price of oil went up, and then when people figured out, well, they're not cutting what they don't produce, prices went back down again. It's OPEC. Well, Saudi Arabia is upset, and Biden was upset at OPEC Plus and Saudis for saying we're going to cut production because he wanted them to boost production, lower prices. But Saudis are not happy with the U.S. They feel we have not been supportive as we should be. Saudi Arabia, in their fight against Iran for who's in charge of the Middle East, they feel we prematurely withdrew support for their efforts in Yemen to oust or to fight against the Iranian-backed rebels. So there's a lot of politics. It's like Saudis were upset with us. They don't think we're really with them. We're maybe trying to negotiate too much with Iran. So they were happy just to poke Biden in the eye and say, well, we're not going to boost production. We're going to cut it. Interestingly, Venezuela now, I don't want to say maybe our new best friend, but maybe less of a jerk than we used to think. You know, and the White House is getting lobbied by Chevron and others because Venezuela has a lot of oil. And it's the heavy, gunky stuff that U.S. West Coast refiners have set up to refine. It's like their perfect product. It's low cost. Those refiners are set up to handle this stuff. Venezuela is at maybe 500,000 barrels a day of production. Estimates are they could double that within a matter of months if U.S. sanctions were lifted. Chevron, certainly. Opportunistic from a capitalist point of view. Be happy to get this. They could ramp up quickly. Whether you ever get back to 2 or 3 million barrels a day will take a lot more money and a lot more time. But it'll be interesting to see because at one point in the 90s, Venezuela was producing more than 3 million barrels a day. We're down to 500,000. Close by, politically stable? No. Is the United States politically stable? No. Maybe that's not an excuse not to give. One other thing, it was interesting at the OPEC Plus decision, the United Arab Emirates argued against Saudi Arabia to cut production. UAE's attitude or the policy is produce as much oil as fast as we can, because at some point the world's going to stop buying it, and it's not worth squat if we leave in the ground. So UAE is saying, hey, no, none of this production cut. Let's just flood it. Let's just turn on the taps. They want to boost production 20%. They lost the argument. Next slide. OPEC, rather than acknowledging the politics of it, they blame underinvestment for high prices. And it's sort of kind of right. You know, certainly investment during oil price crashes and during the pandemic scaled back a lot in this country and around the world. And they're right. If there was a lot more oil, if there was more investment, prices would be lower. So they're they're blaming everyone else. They're saying it's those climate people and it's the bankers who won't loan on it. It's political leaders. But I look at this and think, well, it's also in your self-interest if you're Saudis to blame everyone else and to push for more investment, because you know that if the world invests trillions of dollars more in oil and gas, they're going to consume it, and it's going to extend the life of oil as a primary fuel source. So you want that sunk capital if you're the Saudis, and you want to encourage it. So closer to home, the president has been drawing down the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to get more oil on the market, to hopefully lower prices. U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve is at the lowest level it's been in almost 4 decades. That's got some people worried. Yes, it's great to bring the oil out, and it's probably helped to some extent tamper down prices. But if it really was there for an emergency, like a total cutoff from the Middle East or some catastrophic pipeline blast or another BP blowout in the Gulf, you're going to want that strategic reserve. But we're getting kind of low. So the president's come up with a plan, kind of like hedging, in that, okay, you're right, we're going to have to refill this. So let's tell the industry, when oil gets to 70, we'll buy it back at 70. Because the argument is, if you're selling the Strategic Petroleum Reserve now and then you've got to replenish it at 100, and that's a loser because you didn't pay the $100 for the stuff that went in there years ago. So he's saying when it gets to 70, you know, that'll be a floor. Sell us all the oil you want at 70. That's like, and first of all, I don't think it's going to work, but that's similar to saying, I'll buy all the new cars you want to sell me at last year's prices. No one's going to sell them to you. No one's going to sell oil or promise to sell oil at 70 when they can still get close to 90. They're going to be hesitant to do that. So the last political thing now, there's a lot of talk. It's not just the president. It's mostly Democrats, but some Republicans have joined. And the UK actually has done this. A windfall oil tax. California's talking about it. Sure, I get the politics and the popularity, but I just think it probably is more likely that the Alaska legislature passed an income tax before Congress would do a windfall oil tax. And those are both pretty bleak. Well, take that back. So two unlikely events. One, a personal income tax in Alaska, a windfall profit tax passed by a soon-to-be Republican-dominated Congress, and an Alaska gas line. I put them all in the ain't gonna happen category. But you do have this mismatch. You got a lot of refined products and a lot of crude on the US Gulf Coast, but you can't economically move it to the demand centers on the West and East Coast because of the Jones Act restrictions. So we've got our own problems here, just the logistics, getting it to where it's supposed to be. The West Coast still imports a lot of product, a lot of crude oil, because it's cheaper to bring it in from somewhere else than to go find a Jones Act compliant tanker to bring it in from the US Gulf Coast. So that's kind of, I guess, a problem of our own making. And we also, the US actually has been setting records for exports of crude oil and refined products. Lots of reasons. One, balancing out where we have it and they don't need it in the Gulf Coast, so you send it to where needed. Also, for refineries, one of their biggest expenses is the natural gas they use to heat their systems. So if you're a US refinery, yeah, you're probably not happy about paying $5 and $6 for gas these days, but it's a fraction of what refineries in Europe are paying. So you can produce refined product here and ship it to Europe to make up for what they're not getting from Russia and still make money. So yeah, we are doing a lot of exports of crude and refined products out of the country, which if the public really focused on, they'd be pissed off because they say, well, I'm paying $5.20 and you're sending it to Rotterdam. The next one, there's not that many. So we talked about crude. Natural gas is really messed up too. Earlier this year, European and Asian buyers were kind of competing each other. They had driven up the spot price. And again, this is the spot market price, $50, $60 per 1,000 cubic feet. And we're paying what, $8 in Cote Inlet. US prices this year have run between $5 and $10. To give you an idea, and most liquefied natural gas in the world is sold on contracts linked to the price of oil, different percentages, but most of it's linked to oil on long-term deals. If you're paying $60 per million BTU for LNG, converted LNG equivalent basis, that's like paying $400 for a barrel of oil. It's really expensive. No wonder glass manufacturers and fertilizer plants and smelters in Europe are closing. They use gas. You can't make a product at $400 oil and sell it. But since then, there was a warm fall. China, economic activity, industrial activity was on the downhill side because of zero COVID policies. So all of a sudden, there's a lot more LNG out there. Prices have dropped by about half in some of those peaks. Not a bargain at $30, but you're actually seeing some restart of some factories in Europe at that price. So what I find interesting is you have all these buyers who ordered LNG in advance because it takes a long time to get there. And now you've got about 3 dozen tankers anchored off the coast of Europe because in the time when they struck those sales deals and now gas in Europe is selling for less than they paid for it on that tanker. So they're going to kind of slow roll it and kind of slow down their voyages. And not everyone, but some of them, hoping that come winter, there'll be a demand spike, prices will rise, and now I can pull that tanker into port and sell it at a profit. They've also got a problem if prices stay low in Europe or lower, that some of the gas they bought and imported and put into storage is now not worth as much as they paid for it. So there again, if I paid 38 and it's in storage and I'm paying a storage fee and I pull it back out, it'd be interesting to see how the market reacts to this. Sticking on gas, the fact that the world had been shifting from coal to natural gas, cleaner, right? Cleaner burning, less emissions, all that. But when gas is that expensive, you're seeing a resurgence of coal in Europe, in Asia, extending the life of projects they thought they were going to shut down. It's just economics. It's not denying climate change. It's basically saying, I can't afford it this year. Talk to me next year or in a couple years. Nuclear, Japan, the government says we want to restart more nuclear plants. France, Macron, this past week said, I want to build new nuclear plants, not even restart them. They've actually short nuclear power. They had a bunch of maintenance problems. He wants to fix the maintenance and build some new ones. So I guess one question is, what long term will coal be around a lot longer than we expected, or is this just a temporary affliction? Will the world really go back to nuclear? You know, Germany had said, we're out. Several years ago, Germany said, that's it, we're done, we're shutting them down. You know, will the newfound embrace of nuclear last? You know, is there going to be permanent demand destruction, for the term of the day, permanent demand destruction for LNG? China, because of zero COVID and increased production locally and more pipeline gas, they've actually going to import less gas this year in decline, first time ever. Long term, they are not expected to be this double-digit growth market that they were. So again, are these temporary changes or these permanent changes? Will China rev up its economy and start going back to a 10% growth rate, or is the long-term guess of 2% sort of the new world order is? Will people say, okay, coal got me through 22, 23, but that's it, that's no more. You know, I'm going to quit the addiction and go back to gas. I don't know, but it'll be interesting. One other variable in this, so there's one big pipeline called Power Siberia 1 that pumps gas from Siberian oil fields in Russia to China. And now they're talking, well, Putin and China signed the deal this year, whether it happens, building a second big pipeline. But these pipelines are talking like 3.5 billion cubic feet a day. If they build a second one, they both ramp up to full production. That takes a lot of LNG out of the market. So next slide. Aside from all this, companies have already made investment decisions based on, several years ago, well, the world's going to need more LNG. We're going to gas. We're not going back to nuclear or coal. There's a plant in Texas, Freeport LNG, a large one, 15 million tons, almost as much as the one proposed in Kiski. They went offline in June after an explosion and fire. They're supposed to come back, they say, by the end of the year. Mozambique, there's a small project there of about 3.5 million tons. They should be shipping out their first cargo any day. The developers of that, Eni, the Italian company, has sold the output for 20 years to BP. BP is just going to be a marketer, commodities trader on the full production. Russia is building its second Arctic LNG plant, supposed to start up next year. They've lost US technology, Western financing, but the expectation is they'll bring it on just probably slower than they had first thought. Maybe instead of ramping it up over 23, 24, 25, it'll stretch out, but they're still going ahead with it. You've got Qatar and ExxonMobil are partners in Golden Pass LNG in Texas. That's under construction. That's another 15 million tons. LNG Canada, a Shell-led project under construction, Kitimat, British Columbia, probably first gas within the next 3 years. That's 14 million tons. They're looking at doubling capacity because once you've got the plant and the pipeline from the shale gas fields, that second expansion or the expansion becomes a lot more cost effective, depending on market. Qatar, which was the world's largest producer before the US stepped in, they have issued contracts. They have taken on partners, including ConocoPhillips, Shell, ExxonMobil, a couple others. They're expanding their output 60% by 2026. Very low cost production. You know, whereas we measure here in dollars, they measure quarters. Very low cost. So you add all that up, there's another couple plants on the Gulf Coast. Sempra Energy, which, I don't know how long ago was it? 20 years, they kind of dabbled in Alaska a little bit through the Alaska Gas Line Port Authority, and then realized that was a wasted $6 million. They just announced they're going to make a final investment decision next year and probably go ahead with a Port Arthur, Texas LNG project. There's one Semper is involved in building an export project on Mexico Baja. So you look at all those, and these aren't even dreams or proposals. These are under construction or about to start, close to 50% more capacity than the world had last year. So you've got all this stuff coming. Sort of hope that if you're one of those investors, you hope the market's there as these come on in 24, 25, 26, and that people have gotten over coal, decided maybe nuclear is not so good. China is back in this strong economic engine, as is Europe. So the last ones, around the world in the last couple of years, almost 4 million barrels a day of refineries capacity has closed down. Just wasn't economic. In the US, we lost about 7% of our refinery capacity the last couple of years. Some are being converted to distribution hubs. Some, Phillips 66 in California is converting one to a biofuels plant. It's, I guess, what the message is, that's kind of the way the world is changing and transitioning. Certainly, I guess you have the interruption because of high prices in Europe and the war in Ukraine and what that's meaning. But the companies looked at it and said, we don't need that many refineries. And it was also a question of, yeah, that's sunk capital they've been running, but they're at a point now where they need a lot of investment for modernization, for cleaner production. We're not going to put more money into it. It's like the car, boy, it's been a great car for 20 years, still sort of runs, but it's really not worth putting more money into it. I'm just going to get rid of the car. And that's where they were on a lot of these refineries. There's a Norwegian energy analyst company called Rystad, and according to their numbers in this year, 2022, they count that the world is investing more money in wind and solar than fossil fuel. Now, maybe their numbers are not exact, but it's, again, that's the way the trend is going. Maybe there's a delay of a couple years because of the economic challenges now. The International Energy Agency forecast, that's their opinion, that by 2030, natural gas will plateau. Natural gas demand in the world will plateau. So it'll be interesting if that's true and all this new stuff's coming online, much of it's contracted. How's that going to work out for you? To me, this was very telling. BP just announced they have bought a US producer of renewable energy for more than $4 billion because they want to build up their biofuels business. They want to get into renewables. They want to meet decarbonization targets. And this company doesn't produce that much. But it's interesting, almost, well, more than 4 billion. It's not that far from the 5 billion that BP got by selling all its Alaska assets 2 years ago. That tells you, so all this production from Prudhoe Bay and the assets, 5 billion, and you bought, I don't want to say, it's a real company, this biofuels company, but you bought a biofuels hopeful for more than $4 billion because that's where BP sees it's going to put its money. The last one, the variables, geez, I don't know, we find an end to the war in Ukraine. The market welcomed back Russian oil and gas, but I think a question, if that actually happens, how much production capacity has Russia lost from turning down those wells, from losing US or Western technology, Western contractors, subcontractors? I don't expect that Russia will go back to where it was as the world's largest producer of crude oil and refined products. I just don't think you can restart it. Is China going to become a growth engine or not? And these are supply and demand questions. Supply out of Russia, demand out of China. How long is the worldwide recession going to be? How deep is it going to be? What's that going to do to demand? Is the loss of demand permanent or just a temporary affliction? Is France really going to build nuclear plants? Is the UK really going to go ahead with new licensing rounds in the North Sea? Because they want their own oil and gas. I don't think US producers will ever return to the boom days of shale production because they sort of learned their lesson from all those bankruptcies. They were investing and producing and losing money on every field and every barrel. So they're going to be much more disciplined, even though we have a lot of potential. They're not going to produce it, not in their best interest. But if you knew the answers to how much oil is going to come out of the Permian Basin, the biggest producing region in the country, what will happen to Russia's production if and when there's someday peace in Ukraine, what's China's economy look like in 2030, you'd know how to make your investment decisions based on oil and gas futures. And whatever you do, do not trade on anything, because I don't know. But I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. Just, I don't think this cockamamie scheme with Russia and price caps are going to work. So I think higher prices are with us for a while, but at some point, the world's still going to shift away. And we probably at that point will have lower prices because there'll just be more supply than people need. Okay, so questions?
All right, yeah. Bernie, go ahead.
A couple of questions.
Yeah.
You know, they got another lease sale in Cook Inlet,
Right.
coming up, and I don't know, it's 2 point something billion acres.
Yeah, a lot of land.
And they haven't done very well in capacity sales that they've had.
Right.
But with the price of natural gas coming up, it's already increased, you know, not by us, but by Henry Hub,
Yeah.
almost 75% in the last year. So with that higher price, is that going to bring any more people who didn't own our natural gas and doing actual exploration?
Yeah.
For the question, could you mind just
Yeah.
clarifying?
So the question is, the federal government is going ahead with a lease sale of oil and gas acreage in Cook Inlet. And will there be interest in it this time as opposed to other times where there was really no interest in? I don't think there's going to be that much interest, because even though you're right, lower 48, Henry Hub, US natural gas benchmark is higher. Why would you invest in Cook Inlet? Because you're going to have to build a liquefaction plant to move it. And it kills the economics of it. I think Hill Corp might, if they see some good prospects, but I would think if I'm Hill Corp, I would look for acreage that could drill from shore rather than having to put in platforms. They're very expensive. And so Hill Corp earlier this fall told the South Central utilities, hey, you know, as you go ahead, we're not sure that we have enough proven producing reserves to meet your needs going ahead. And people sort of panic because we do that in South Central with gas. But I think what Hill Corp was saying in their artful language was, tell us how much gas you want and how long you're going to want it. And we'll tell you how much it will cost because we have it, but we're not going to invest in production. So you tell me, do you want signing 5-year contracts or 10-year contracts? So I think we don't so much have a gas shortage, we have a gas investment decision for Hill Corp that hinges on how much the utilities want to buy and for how long. Because Hill Corp would say, well, if you're going to do this with wind and you're going to do this with solar and you're going to do this, well, great, that's fine. Just tell me, because I'll tailor my investment and my production to what you're willing to buy. I'm not going to speculate on it. So anyway, getting back to Cook Inlet, you know, I certainly don't know the acreage. I would think if there's something that's maybe close to an existing unit that they can reach from shore, but I don't think there's going to be a lot of interest. There was a political decision, a requirement that we'll vote for this, said the Alaska delegation, if it mandates there's a Cook Inlet lease sale. So they'll go ahead with the Cook Inlet lease sale. Yeah.
Are looking at shortage of natural gas.
Right.
7 years,
Right.
And I guess the question is, if that shortage comes to pass because there's no investment in
Right.
proposed natural gas lines, could they start talking about importing natural gas from the British Columbia one that you just said? That's
Yeah.
like
14 million tons, yeah. So
That
the,
seems like a lot.
right. So the question is, if in 7 years, Hill Corp says, hey, I'm not producing enough gas. You guys didn't sign contracts. I'm not going to invest. Where Cook Inlet or where South Central would get their gas. I think there'll be a negotiated deal between Hill Corp and the utilities before then. But you have two options if you don't have enough gas in Cook Inlet. One is Marathon now owns the formerly Conoco LNG Export Terminal in the Kiski. They do have federal authorization to convert that to an import terminal. I'm going to guess that's probably tens of millions, not hundreds of millions to import. You certainly wouldn't want to do it if you're going to pay $30 for the gas. You'd rather pay Hill Corp $9. But so that's one option. They do have that authorization. I think it would take them, I don't know, 2-3 years to do it, but they could, and you could import LNG from anywhere in the world, or you could bring it up. You wouldn't need large tankers, maybe barges, but you could import it from Kitimat, British Columbia. You still need the facility. So Marathon would still have to spend the money to convert the Kiski plant to import, but getting it from Kitimat may turn out to be cheaper than buying a load from Papua New Guinea or Australia. Yeah, the gas would be there. It's just no matter how much Hill Corp is going to want, it's probably going to be cheaper to buy it from Hill Corp. No, Jones Act would not apply taken from Canadian port. Yeah. Yeah, there would be no Jones Act requirement from a Canadian port. There would be a Jones Act requirement if you tried to buy LNG from one of the 8 or 9 operating U.S. Gulf Coast terminals. And the last U.S. LNG carrier was built in the 70s with federal subsidies. So I'd say that's kind of on the list of things that ain't going to happen.
Yeah, thinking of the Arctic in the broad sense, not just the Arctic Circle. We of course have what you pointed out, these 2 gas lines from Russia to the Baltic, to Europe.
Right, Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2.
We have 2 to China, 1 to China.
Right, and 1 proposed, yeah.
And so you've already got that infrastructure there. You can see the possible future for it. And then you've got Norway, which currently is finding a little bit more.
Right.
And it has the infrastructure. Other than those things, in light of all the increases in oil and also natural gas capacity that is not in the Arctic, do you see much potential for the Arctic on gas or oil in the longer term future?
For the U.S. Arctic, so the question is there a future for Arctic gas in the world? Certainly in Russia there is. That's where their gas is. Northern Sea Route, less and less ice. They still have icebreaker escorts, but the government provides those. They got a fleet of nuclear icebreakers that bigger than some of the fishing fleets we have in this state. So separating out Russian Arctic, which is, well, before the war was going to be this LNG production center, now less so, I think, because of sanctions. I think environmentally, politically, it'd be tough to develop any kind of oil or gas project in the U.S. Arctic. I think no publicly traded company in this country wants a headline in the Washington Post or Wall Street Journal that says, Bank of whatever underwrites Arctic oil and gas. So a big company could do it out of their own cash flow, their own pockets. But as we've seen Shell, Exxon, and BP, they're not up there. So I think, and you can still need icebreaker escorts. Mead Treadwell has this proposal, Killick LNG, which would be offshore from Point Thompson. And his idea is forget the pipeline through Alaska. It's expensive. It's a money loser. Do a smaller project. His project off the North Slope would be 1/4 the capacity, 1/4 the size of the Alaska LNG project in the Kiski. His idea is that way you don't need as big a share of the market. You just make it smaller. You can get into the market, capital costs down, but you're still going to need icebreaker escorts much of the year. You're still going to have to deal with environmental, political opposition. Still got to find buyers. But Mead's been working this his whole life, so I guess I would say, well, if anyone could pull it off, he might be able to. But it's still politically and you think back all the protests to pipelines in the lower 48, the Keystone or others, we sort of avoided that up here because we weren't building anything. I would think if you actually tried to build something offshore, whether it's pipeline or 12-mile causeway to deep water for that project, I think all that focus that you saw down lower 48 would just shift here. And I think companies. One last thing, until recently, developers of US or Alaska LNG projects all said, we'll get our money and support from China. Well, now politically, that's not a winning strategy. Yeah. And the IRA is the, yeah. I don't think so. It did make one change. Federal law provided that a sponsor or developer of an Alaska gas line to the lower 48 would be eligible to apply for federal loan guarantees. The idea being if you get a federal loan guarantee, your cost of debt is cheaper, drives down the cost of the project. And there was the imperative, this was written 20 years ago when the US thought they were going to run out of natural gas. The imperative being the federal government, as a matter of policy, should provide guarantees for a project to bring Alaska gas to the mid-continent, because otherwise we're going to run out. Well, then shale gas build that project. And an LNG project until the IRA was not eligible to apply. It did change one provision of the law, and now if you're going to build an export project, you legally can apply for a loan guarantee, but much like any other federal loan guarantee, SBA or something, you still got to meet the qualifications. You got to go line up your customers, your financing, your what do they call those things, pro forma, and then go to the Department of Energy and say, here's my package, will you give me a guarantee? So the law doesn't require it. It doesn't mandate it. It just says you are now eligible to apply for it. And I'd say, how would I quantify that benefit? I'd say smidgy. If it's such a good project, you don't need a federal loan guarantee. And if it's a bad project, the federal government shouldn't guarantee it. But certainly in Alaska, when you've got a bad project, you go to the state. Because they're like Mikey with the cereal. He'll do anything.
So a lot of stuff you see in the headlines is they're talking about U.S. oil producers. They need to ramp up production.
Right.
One pushback I had heard about that, and forgive my ignorance on this, but was even if they did increase their oil production, there'd still be a bottleneck in the refinery sector. What are the? That seems to generate demand. Why not improve existing refineries or produce more refineries?
But right, so the question, right. So the question is, why don't U.S. producers who are sitting on a lot of leases produce more? What's the bottleneck? What's stopping them?
Or what's the pushback or the hesitation to?
Right. Why are they hesitant?
More refineries?
Right. So I think part of it is that that geographic, that there's more feedstock, oil and gas in Gulf Coast, but they don't need the refined products. So now you're going to have to move it to the West Coast. The economics are you can probably buy refined products from Asia. So the world is cutting back, closing refineries everywhere except Asia, Malaysia, Indonesia, China. You can probably buy refined products from there cheaper than by the time you move it on a Jones Act tanker from the Gulf Coast. The other thing is time. So those kind of investment decisions, environmental permitting, construction take years. Are you really certain that if you brought this online 5 years from now, the demand would still be there after you sunk billions into it? And that scares people. That really does. Okay. Okay.
And the gap in
Yeah.
energy,
Okay, yeah. So the question is, as you think about South Central energy supply, what about the Susitna Dam? And I just had a conversation before I came here with someone with rail belt utilities. He said, maybe it's time just to cough up the 100 and some million and finish permitting for the Susitna Watana Dam. For the very reason that if gas doesn't work out and we want this long term, so I just haven't heard Susitna Watana in years. But yeah, there are people who are thinking, well, maybe that's not such a crazy idea to at least finish the permitting, though. Now I've heard estimates 100, 150 million, 180 million. That's a lot of money, and someone's got to pay it. I doubt South Central utility customers want that rolled into their rates. So my guess is it'd be the state who would be asked to pay for it. But some people are starting to talk about that. There again, I don't know, how long would it take to finish permitting and construct it? 15 years? Yeah. But some people are thinking maybe, but I guess by then, how much will we win? Westinghouse gave a presentation here, I don't know, a few weeks ago. They're really trying to develop these micro reactors. Basically, it's a 40-foot box, a container. They send up 3 or 4 boxes, hook everything up, 5 megawatts, 10 megawatts, 15 megawatts. When you need to refuel, it's like returning the toner cartridge. You send them back the reactor, they send you a new one in another 40-foot van. Is that going to take off? Yeah, some people actually are thinking about this. Yeah. Right. So, like the Alaska Gas Line Development Corporation, the state-funded agency that's trying to deliver the AK LNG project, is now pitching themselves kind of as this hydrogen project. So there's 3 kinds of hydrogen. There's gray hydrogen, which is made by burning fossil fuels and venting the CO2 to the atmosphere. No one wants gray hydrogen. Blue hydrogen, which is what AGDC is talking about, is where you use natural gas to make hydrogen and then you re-inject the CO2 underground. And then there's green hydrogen, where you make the hydrogen using renewables. That's what the market really wants. And if you're a company, Australia, Japan are working on some pilot projects, some others, it's the green hydrogen that's uneconomic at the moment, doesn't have the technology, the commercial scale, but that's the holy grail. So I'm not sure promoting the blue hydrogen is going to move the needle, as they say. Well, I can tell you, so Alaska LNG has its FERC authorization. It has a Department of Energy export authorization, but the Department of Energy a year ago said, new administration, we want to review that and do a supplemental EIS to look at, I call it cradle to grave, emissions from production to point of consumption. The Department of Energy is getting close to finishing that supplemental EIS, and the delegation, all 3 of them, have recently sent letters to the Department of Energy saying, finish that supplemental. This is great timing. We want to go to market. Well, project wants to go to market, and we encourage you, Secretary Granholm of the Department of Energy, to finish the supplemental and move on. So the delegation supported. Right? Delegation supported that. They're supportive of Willow. They're supportive of Ambler. I have to be careful since I now work for the delegation. You'd be hard pressed to find a resource development project in this state that the delegation is not in favor of. Okay, Pebble. Yeah. Yeah.
And final question.
So the question of, and right, a lot of talk, not just green hydrogen, ammonia, methane. The market's looking for things, any fuel that burns cleaner. I think that's probably the future. I just don't think the economics of the Alaska project work. There's gas that you can use to make ammonia and methane and green hydrogen, or it's just, you still, look, Alaska Gas Line Development Corporation is out there promoting this $39 billion cost estimate that's almost 3 years old. And I'd say that's kind of irresponsible. I mean, you really think your 3-year-old estimates are still valid? So when you update those and look at what's going on, I think it still has an economic hurdle that, I won't say impossible, but is going to be very high to overcome, whether you're going to use it to make liquefied natural gas or ammonia or methane or restart the fertilizer plants in Nikiski. They're just commodities, and the high cost works against you, and the long lead time for the project.
Well, Larry, on behalf of Commonwealth North, Bernie, Mary Ann, and members, we
Sure.
really appreciate you being here. It's always good to hear you reflect on these market factors, as well as obviously the politics of what's happening right now.
And I can't talk like this in Washington, so it's nice to come here.
Well, anytime you want to speak candidly, please call us. We're happy to provide a forum for you. So let's
Okay.
thank Larry.
Sure.
And,